All the horrors we face today will only be solved if we understand that we are all in this together. We are most moved toward action by our relationships with others. We need to develop a sense of belonging in and to the world that tells us other people are ours to care for. These are the words of author and family activist Mia Birdsong. Other people are ours to care for. Without ever saying those words, my family taught me this lesson at a young age. Despite the fact that our house was small and all the beds were spoken for, and we didn't have a lot of extra resources to share, there were always extra bodies around. Frequently, we would have people staying with us for extended periods of time. An old friend of my dad's who was temporarily homeless, someone from the running community who was between jobs, a former coworker in transition, figuring out their next steps, a young man my parents had been befriended who'd just been released from prison. We even had friends drop off their dogs to live with us. Would you mind keeping her for a few months? I'm going to be traveling a lot. We didn't have a spare bedroom, and the kitchen table only had 4 chairs. Our visitors slept on the futon couch in my brother's basement bedroom. We ate on our laps in the living room. When I was old enough to drive, I quickly learned to park on the grass so that whoever had stopped by or temporarily moved in would be able to pull out without making it a whole thing. It all felt so normal and certainly made for interesting dinner conversation. There was always someone around to give a ride or do the dishes or feed the dogs. In fact, the wider we drew our circle, the more we embraced others, the healthier and more loving my nuclear family seemed to be. It was in modeling a small but radical vision of hospitality and interdependence that my parents taught me. Other people are ours to care for. We spoke last Sunday about the ministry of presence. This treasure we possess, the text read, is in earthen vessels. We carry within our very human selves gifts and love that are beyond us, and we offer them to those whom we gift our time and attention. But the ministry of presence is not confined to a one-on-one interaction. When many earthen vessels, all full of different gifts, are put together, I believe we have the power to transform. Perhaps the reason why my family seemed to have and thrive with our unspoken open door policy is because when we opened our doors, inviting in old and new friends full of their own quirks and gifts, we were as transformed by their love as they were by ours. As Mia Birdsong writes, we are made for interdependence, connection, and love, but part of a culture that espouses the opposite. Part of a culture that pressures us to think that the nuclear family should meet all of our needs, that independence is strength, that our resources should be saved for our own wants and needs, and that people who look or act or speak or pray or love differently than we do are not our concern. Yet we know too well, just by looking around, that when a culture of individualism saturates a society, we are left with division injustice, violence, and profound and widespread loneliness. And so living into the truth of our interdependence, living into the truth of our deep belonging, living into the truth that liberation for some is not liberation. It is countercultural work. Through Mia Birdsong's writing, I was introduced to the historian David Hackett Fischer. He explores the words liberty and freedom, words that have become, in our current political climate and within modern social movements, deeply divisive. His work stood out to me because it is this very divisiveness and individualism that makes our commitment as a faith community to drawing wide the circle of belonging and of flourishing, and to live the truth of our interdependence counter-cultural. I learned that the English roots liberty and freedom, the English words liberty and freedom, have very different roots. Though the Latin and Greek roots of the word liberty have connotations of independence, the Indo-European root of freedom is freya or priya, the same root as the word friend, meaning dear or beloved. Fischer writes that freedom referred to rights of belonging. It meant a connection to other free people by bonds of kinship or affection. To be free, then, is to belong. It is in our life together and our commitment to one another that we find freedom. Though I do not myself identify as a Christian, I do love to think about what it might have been like for followers of Jesus to begin after his death building communities based around his teachings and the stories from his ministry. Not unlike the fellowship movement in our own denomination in the 1950s and 60s, where small lay-led communities began to pop up across the country. At first with no building, no minister, just the pull of community life. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in the times of the early Christian church and the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship movement, bearing witness to the dysfunctional, messy holiness that is being in human relationship as we work to live out our values as imperfect and aspirational people. It's why I hang around churches so much. In the passage we read this morning, the Apostle Paul writes to one of these emerging communities, and his words are full of wisdom. He likens the community of faith to a body in which many different parts come together. They remain unique and different. They are not asked to assimilate or conform, but they do become part of something much larger. The gift of hearing is needed from the ear, of stability from the foot. The gifts are so different, but without them, the whole would not be the whole. All parts of the body, all members of the faith community, as Paul explains to the Corinthians, are indispensable. And when you are in deep community like that, he writes, if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members share its joy. This right here is part of our tradition's Christian heritage that will serve us well to hold on to. We need one another. We are wired for connection. Other people are ours to care for. Many of you will have heard the term spiritual but not religious, and some of you may even identify with it yourselves. There was a point in my teens where I claimed that identity, yearning to embrace a life of the Spirit, but still rejecting the concept of religion, which felt like a slippery slope in the direction of institutions of dogma, rigidity, and power. Yet, I joined a Unitarian Universalist church. I became invested and involved, much like many of you. And I have become comfortable with the idea that we are a religion. And I now identify as a religious person, not because my theology or any of my beliefs have changed, but because I understand my identity as a religious person to mean living out my spirituality and my values in community. To be a religious community is not about beliefs or dogma or institutions at all. It is about a commitment to embrace the mess of living out our faith together. It is the affirmation that all of our quirkiness and brokenness and all of our gifts are needed. That my faith is fully realized only in the context of your faith, even if our beliefs might not be the same. We choose to belong to one another. We choose to be earthen vessels among other earthen vessels because we know the truth is that the treasures we possess, when put together, the love we carry when shared, they are amplified beyond our comprehension. To be free is to belong. So I believe that it is in our life together, many parts but one body. And through our commitment to one another, that we will find freedom. And just as my parents opened our home to the quirks and the gifts of old and new friends, and we were all transformed by that love, so too might true freedom be realized if we draw our circles wide enough to hold us all. May we need and be needed without apology. Commit to our collective life and work on getting everyone free so that we might call one another friend. May it be so. Amen.